A silent farewell. On an early autumn morning, the air hung with the scent of damp leaves and the echo of distant church bells. In Montreal's Old Quarter, a place where time seemed to fold upon itself in layers of history, the community gathered to bid farewell to Andrea LaSalle. The woman who had filled the lives of many with her quiet elegance and generosity was now but a memory, her essence drifting in whispers through the grand hall of St. Patrick's Church. Andrea's legacy had not just been her wealth, but the warmth she exuded, a presence that somehow filled every room she entered. And today, the room was filled with somber faces, quiet sobs, and a sense of irreplaceable loss. In the front pew sat Lionel, Andrea's husband, his face a mask of carefully curated grief. He lowered his gaze, occasionally glancing at the carved wooden pews, as though the intricate patterns might offer solace. But Lionel's mind was elsewhere, detached from the reality around him. The echoes of Andrea's life filled the church, but they didn't penetrate the barrier he had built within himself. His thoughts drifted to Miranda, his lover, hidden among the mourners, her dark veil blending into the shadows. Though he appeared every bit the grieving husband, beneath the veneer of sorrow, he was a man waiting to be freed from a life that felt like a cage, bound by Andrea's wealth and their loveless marriage. In a few short hours, Andrea's life would be confined to memories and condolences, and the door to Lionel's new beginning would swing open. He had promised himself that once Andrea was gone, he would live the life he had always desired. That life included Miranda. Their relationship had been a secret, an illicit thrill hidden behind closed doors, whispered words, and stolen glances. The excitement had been intoxicating, a release from the stifling reality of his marriage. Now, with Andrea's passing, those quiet passions could breathe openly. Miranda sat toward the back of the church, her veil shielding her from curious eyes. She had debated whether to attend, knowing the risks. Yet something urged her to be here, to witness the formal end of a life that had held her own at bay. She watched Lionel with a steady gaze, noticing his subtle, almost imperceptible relief. A silent promise lingered between them, a vow born of years spent in secrecy and now waiting for the opportune moment to step into the light. The funeral service continued, each eulogy adding weight to Andrea's memory. Stories of her charity, her unwavering dedication to the community, and the way she had silently helped those in need painted a picture of a woman who was, in many ways, a stranger to Lionel. He had seen glimpses of that woman, but the image didn't align with the coldness he had felt in their private life. While others revered her, he resented her, resented the indifference that had settled into their marriage like dust on an old photograph, gathering quietly and thickening over time until there was nothing left to see of the person he'd once thought he loved. As the priest offered his final words and the congregation rose, Lionel took a slow, deep breath. He had prepared himself for this moment, the farewell that would sever the ties he had once bound himself with. Walking to Andrea's casket, he placed a single white rose on the polished wood, a gesture both tender and final. His fingers brushed the surface, cold and unyielding, much like his memories of her. He allowed himself a final glance, a pause heavy with conflicting emotions, then stepped away, closing that chapter of his life forever. Stepping out into the misty autumn air, Lionel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, only to be replaced by another, a strange, unsettling sensation that prickled at his consciousness. He dismissed it as residual guilt, the kind that clings to a person after years of shared life, no matter how hollow that life may have been. He was a free man now, wasn't he? Free to follow his desires, to step into a future with Miranda, a future where every moment would be untethered, unbound by the stifling expectations that had followed him through his marriage. Miranda joined him outside, her veil lifted just enough to reveal a faint smile. She slipped her hand into his, a gesture both comforting and possessive. It was a silent affirmation of their plans, their shared ambitions, and the wealth that would soon be theirs. Together, they would head to the bank later that day, secure Andrea's inheritance, and finally taste the freedom they had craved. The city seemed to watch them as they walked, the tall, age-old buildings bearing silent witness to their unspoken secrets. The narrow streets wound around them, and the chill of the morning air settled in layers, as if the past and present were intertwining in the mist. Lionel couldn't shake the feeling that Montreal itself was watching, as though the city held André's memory within its walls, like an invisible presence that lingered and would not be dispelled. Back in the car, the silence between them was thick with anticipation. Miranda's hand rested on Lionel's arm, grounding him, her touch a reminder of the future they were about to claim. "It's just the beginning," she whispered, her voice low but brimming with promise. The words settled into his mind like a mantra, soothing the remnants of doubt that lingered in his mind. Yet, as they drove through the city streets, Lionel felt something creeping into his thoughts, a feeling that he couldn't quite name. It was more than guilt. It was a sense of being watched, as though Andrea herself still lingered in the world, her presence haunting him from beyond the grave. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her reflection, and shuddered, laughing at his own foolishness. She was gone. He had seen the casket lowered, heard the final words, felt the weight of the earth pressing down. There was no reason to fear her now. Miranda sensed his unease, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied his face. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, her tone edged with the slightest hint of impatience. She had given too much of herself to this affair, endured too many lonely nights, and held too many secrets. The last thing she needed was for Lionel to waver. "No," he replied quickly, his voice firm, dismissing his irrational fears. "It's just, I can't help feeling like she's still here somehow." Miranda's laugh was soft, almost mocking. "The dead can't haunt us, Lionel. Only our memories can." Her words were dismissive, yet they lodged themselves in his mind, feeding the unease that gnawed at him. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the streets, they approached their destination. The bank awaited them, a silent monument to the wealth André had amassed over the years. With her gone, it would be theirs to claim. A legacy neither of them had built, but both were prepared to enjoy. They would leave the bank with the means to start fresh, to build a life unburdened by the past. Yet, as they entered the building, Lionel felt a strange sensation, as if the shadows in the corners of the room were watching, judging. And just for a moment, he thought he saw Andrea's reflection in the polished glass, her face watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He blinked, and the vision was gone, leaving only a hollow echo in his mind, the weight of shadows. As Lionel and Miranda stepped into the grand interior of the bank, a chill filled the space, a palpable silence settling around them. The bank was an old, dignified building, its walls lined with mahogany wood and intricate moldings, a place where generations of Montreal's elite had stored their wealth and secrets. The marble floors glistened under the dim light, each step echoing softly, as if the building itself murmured a warning. It was a place steeped in history, and today that history would take a dark turn. Miranda squeezed Lionel's hand, a small but firm gesture of encouragement. They approached the counter, where a solemn-faced bank officer greeted them with a nod, his face as neutral as polished stone. Miranda's expression was cool and composed, every inch of her the picture of calm efficiency. In contrast, Lionel felt the prickling sensation of unease tightening around him, like an invisible hand pressing on his shoulders. He reminded himself that this was the culmination of years of patience and planning. But the weight of his decision lingered, heavier now in this place where Andrea's legacy resided. The officer led them through a set of heavy oak doors and down a corridor toward the private offices reserved for the bank's most esteemed clients. Lionel's eyes roamed the hallways as they walked, taking in the muted elegance of the space. The walls were adorned with oil paintings depicting Montreal's founders, men and women who had once wielded power over the city. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him, stern and watchful, as if they too knew the nature of his visit. Finally, they were ushered into a spacious office, where another man, tall and impeccably dressed, waited for them. He introduced himself as Mr. Rubicot, the executor of Andrea's estate, a figure who exuded both authority and discretion. His presence was calm, professional, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he missed nothing. The moment was thick with anticipation. Miranda and Lionel sat across from him, their hands folded, their expressions carefully neutral. "Thank you both for coming in today," Mr. Rubicot began, his voice smooth but tinged with a note of gravity. "I am deeply sorry for your loss, Mr. LaSalle." Mrs. LaSalle was a remarkable woman, and she left behind an equally remarkable estate. There are, however, a few formalities to address. Lionel forced himself to nod, summoning the mask of grief that had served him so well at the funeral. But his mind was racing, calculating the precise steps that lay between him and Andrea's wealth. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, anticipating the formalities, the legalities, the signatures that would transfer everything to him. But now, seated before Mr. Rubicot, the process felt unbearably slow, as though fate itself was testing his patience. "Mrs. LaSalle," Mr. Rubicot continued, glancing at a thick folder before him, "was meticulous in her arrangements. Her instructions for the distribution of her estate were comprehensive. She requested that each step be followed with utmost precision." He opened the folder, flipping through the documents with a calm efficiency, his gaze never leaving Lionel's face for long. Lionel felt Miranda shift beside him, her hand brushing his arm in a silent reassurance. But her touch did little to steady him. There was something about the way Mr. Rubicot handled the documents, each page turned with a deliberate slowness, that set his nerves on edge. As the executor detailed Andrea's assets, her investments, her properties, each line of wealth felt like a shackle rather than a promise. And then, almost imperceptibly, Mr. Rubicot hesitated. "There is one matter that requires immediate attention," he said, his tone softening, yet his gaze sharpening. "Mrs. LaSalle left specific instructions for a letter to be read to you, Mr. LaSalle, at the time of the inheritance claim." Lionel's heart skipped a beat. A letter. Andrea had left a letter for him. The thought unsettled him, stirring the strange sense of dread that had lingered since the funeral. He glanced at Miranda, whose face betrayed a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by her composed expression. "Of course," Lionel said, his voice steady but edged with tension. "If that was her wish." Mr. Rubicot reached into the folder and retrieved a sealed envelope, its edges yellowed slightly as if it had been prepared some time ago. He handed it to Lionel with a measured glance, then sat back, folding his hands as though he were both executor and silent witness to whatever would unfold next. Lionel stared at the envelope, his fingers tracing over the familiar handwriting. Andrea's script was elegant, deliberate, much like the woman herself. He could almost hear her voice in his mind, calm and unyielding, the way she had always addressed him. The letter felt heavier than it should have, as if it contained something more than mere words. With a deep breath, Lionel broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. He forced himself to read, his eyes scanning the page with a mixture of trepidation and irritation. "Lionel," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am no longer of this world, and the wealth I leave behind is now within your grasp. But there are things I know that you do not, truths hidden beneath the life we shared, things you believed I would never discover." Lionel's pulse quickened, his hand tightening around the letter. Miranda's gaze flicked toward him, her expression curious but cautious. He continued reading, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. "You see, Lionel, I knew of your affair. I knew of the life you wished to build without me, and the dreams you harbored in the shadows. I knew of the secrets you shared with her, the whispered promises, the plans you laid. I saw through the facade you wore each day, the indifference, the resentment you could not hide." A cold sweat prickled at the back of his neck. How had she known? He glanced up at Mr. Rubicot, who sat with an expression as unreadable as stone. seemingly unaware of the shock radiating through Leonel. Beside him, Miranda's gaze hardened, her composure flickering as she strained to read over his shoulder. "But know this," the letter continued, "I am not a fool, Leonel, and I will not allow my legacy to be so easily claimed. I have left something for you, a challenge, if you will, a puzzle hidden in the details of my estate. If you wish to claim my wealth, you must prove yourself worthy by finding the answer. It will not be easy, and it will not be quick. But should you succeed, the fortune will be yours. Fail, and all you will inherit is the life you sought to escape." Leonel's hand shook as he finished reading. He could barely process the words. A challenge, a puzzle. Andrea had left her inheritance bound by conditions, a game he had to play by her rules, even in her absence. His mind reeled, grasping at the implications. This wasn't the seamless transition to wealth and freedom he had imagined. This was a trap, laid by a woman he had underestimated. Miranda leaned close, her voice a low whisper. "What does it say?" Leonel handed her the letter, his fingers trembling. As she read, her expression darkened, the reality settling in. She looked up at him, her eyes blazing with anger and disbelief. She knew all along. She knew, and she's taunting us. Mr. Rubicard cleared his throat, drawing their attention. His expression was one of practiced neutrality, but there was a faint glint of something in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps, or a hidden amusement. "I am here to assist you, should you wish to proceed," he said smoothly. Mrs. LaSalle was indeed a woman of foresight. She anticipated many outcomes, including this one. Leonel swallowed hard, the weight of Andrea's challenge settling over him like a mantle of ice. The room felt colder, the air heavy and oppressive. He had spent years imagining this moment, planning it, savoring the thought of finally being free from the life he had despised. But now, the path forward was fraught with Andrea's unseen hand, her voice echoing in the depths of his mind. With a forced breath, he met Mr. Robichaud's gaze. "Where do we begin?" he asked, the words barely steady. Mr. Robichaud nodded, his expression impassive as he pulled another document from his folder. Mrs. LaSalle left clues scattered within her estate, letters, journals, hidden messages embedded within her belongings. Each clue will lead to the next, and only by following them all will you reach the final key to her inheritance. Miranda's jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing. "So we're supposed to chase after her ghost, to play along with this game?" "It appears so," Robichaud replied calmly. "Those are her terms." Leonel closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the challenge pressing on him. Andrea was gone, but she had left her presence everywhere. In the corridors of this building, in the wealth he could not touch without first bending to her will. And now, in the twisted path she had laid out for him to follow. As they left the bank that day, Leonel's steps felt heavy, each one echoing with Andrea's laughter, her quiet, knowing laughter, as though she were right there beside him, watching and waiting. The shadows lengthened on the streets, the city's buildings towering over them. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning, the first clue. In the days following their unsettling meeting with Mr. Robichaud, Leonel felt as though he were living in a nightmare crafted by his late wife. The city streets that had once been familiar now seemed like the backdrop to a haunting. Andrea's haunting. Her presence clung to everything, filling each corner of his life with an eerie reminder of her forethought, her intelligence, and her determination to control him even after death. Miranda was equally frustrated, her usual composure giving way to irritability and impatience. This was not the life of freedom they had envisioned, and every day that passed without progress was a bitter reminder of how thoroughly Andrea had anticipated their desires. The letter was only the beginning. In her instructions, Andrea had left a cryptic list, one that Mr. Robichaud had handed to Leonel with a polite nod, his eyes betraying nothing of the content's meaning. Each item on the list was a simple phrase, but together they formed a riddle as complex as the woman herself. The first phrase read, "In the place where truth is guarded by glass, where beauty blooms in silence and light, your path begins." Lionel had pored over the words for hours, trying to decipher their meaning. He thought of every place Andrea might have frequented, every building she might have left her mark upon. But the clue remained elusive, its meaning slipping through his mind like water through his fingers. Frustrated and desperate, he turned to Miranda, who studied the phrase with a calculating look in her eyes. "Truth guarded by glass, beauty blooms in silence and light," she murmured, tapping her fingernail against the table. "It sounds like it's describing a museum, or maybe a library." Lionel's eyes brightened at the suggestion. "The art museum," he said. Andrea loved spending time there, especially in the conservatory. It's where she always felt most at peace. Miranda nodded, her lips curling into a small, determined smile. "Then let's start there." The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts stood as a beacon of history and culture, its imposing facade stretching across the street, adorned with statues and carvings that gave the building an air of solemn mystery. As they entered, the hush of the museum washed over them, the sounds of the city fading into silence, replaced by the soft murmurs of visitors and the delicate echo of footsteps on marble. Here, Andrea's memory was as tangible as the artwork on the walls, her presence woven into the very air they breathed. They walked through the galleries, passing paintings and sculptures, the weight of the past pressing down on them as they searched for anything that might resemble a clue. The conservatory was their final stop, a room filled with exotic plants, sunlight filtering through the glass ceiling, casting a warm glow over the greenery. It was one of Andrea's favorite places, a sanctuary of sorts where she would lose herself among the blooms and the filtered light, a world away from the demands of society. In the center of the conservatory stood a marble bench, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. Lionel felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Regret, perhaps, or guilt, though he had little use for either emotion. Andrea had often sat here, her gaze distant and thoughtful, as though she were already planning this moment. He remembered her sitting there, fingers tracing patterns on the stone, her eyes lost in contemplation. It was as though she had left a piece of herself in this place, waiting for him to return. "What are we looking for?" Miranda whispered, her voice sharp with frustration. "We can't just wander around this museum forever." He was about to respond when his eyes fell on a small plaque beside the bench. The inscription was a poem, something Andrea had loved and often recited to herself. "Beauty lies not in what is seen, but in what the heart alone can glean. Where silence guards the untold truth, seek the voice that hides in youth." Lionel's pulse quickened. The words mirrored Andrea's first clue, echoing the idea of hidden truth and beauty. He read the plaque again, his eyes lingering on the phrase, "untold truth." It was then that he noticed something unusual, a small, nearly invisible latch on the underside of the bench. His heart pounded as he knelt, his fingers brushing over the cold metal, hesitant but compelled to continue. With a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching, he pulled the latch. The bench gave a soft click, and a hidden compartment opened, revealing a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single key, old and worn, with a tag that read, "Truth lies beneath the veil of history." "What is it?" Miranda asked, peering over his shoulder. Her voice held a mixture of excitement and disbelief. They had found something, finally, a tangible piece of Andrea's puzzle. "It's a key," he murmured, examining the tag. The words on it felt heavy with meaning, though their true significance remained just out of reach. And another clue, beneath the veil of history. Miranda's eyes narrowed as she took in the message. "The Historical Society," she suggested. "They house collections from the city's early years." Andrea was on the board for years. She practically treated that place as her second home. Lionel nodded, feeling a spark of hope. Andrea had spent hours at the Historical Society, combing through records and artifacts, piecing together the stories of Montreal's past. If there was anywhere in the city that held a veil of history, it was there. They arrived at the Historical Society as dusk began to settle over the city, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The building was quiet, its facade bathed in the fading light. Inside, the air was cool and musty, filled with the scent of aged paper and wood polished by countless hands over the years. They moved through the dimly lit corridors, past rows of glass cases filled with relics of the past. The key felt heavy in Lionel's pocket, a reminder of the strange journey Andrea had forced upon him. Each step they took through the Historical Society felt like a descent into her mind, as though she had laid her memories and secrets throughout the building, waiting for him to uncover them. It was unsettling, the sense of being led by her hand even now, as if she had anticipated every thought, every doubt. In one of the back rooms, they found a display dedicated to Montreal's founding families, a testament to the city's heritage. Portraits of stoic men and women lined the walls, their eyes watching over the room with an unyielding gaze. But one portrait, hanging alone in a corner, caught Lionel's attention. It was a painting of a young girl, her face serene, her gaze distant. Her eyes were familiar, too familiar. Andrea. It was a painting of her in her youth, a piece he had never seen before. Her expression was thoughtful, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, as though she were guarding a secret. Beneath the painting, a small plaque read, "Truth, like beauty, lies hidden in youth." Miranda touched his arm, her voice low. "Look behind it," she whispered. Lionel hesitated, feeling a strange sense of violation at the thought. But he pushed it aside, reaching for the frame. The painting swung open on a hinge, revealing a safe embedded in the wall. He took the key from his pocket, fitting it into the lock with hands that trembled ever so slightly. The safe clicked open, and inside was a single envelope, sealed with a wax emblem bearing Andrea's initials. With bated breath, he opened the envelope, pulling out a letter written in Andrea's familiar script. "Lionel," it read, "you have found the first of many truths I left for you. The path ahead will not be easy, but it is the path you chose, the path you desired. This is but the beginning. The next step lies in the place where we said our vows, where promises were made and then broken. There you will find the second key to your inheritance. Proceed, if you dare." The words were like a slap in the face, a reminder of the life he had turned his back on. The place where they had said their vows, St. Patrick's Church, it was there that they had promised to love and cherish. Vows that had become hollow, buried under layers of bitterness and deceit. Miranda's face hardened as she read over his shoulder. "She's toying with you," she muttered. "She's making you retrace every part of your life together." Lionel nodded, a dark realization dawning on him. Andrea's game was not just about the inheritance. It was about forcing him to confront every choice, every betrayal, every moment he had failed her. She was leading him back through the ruins of their marriage, forcing him to face what he had discarded in his pursuit of freedom. They left the Historical Society in silence, the weight of Andrea's challenge pressing down on them. The night had fallen fully by the time they reached the street, the shadows deep and impenetrable. For the first time, Lionel felt the full scope of what Andrea had orchestrated. This was not merely a puzzle to solve or a fortune to claim. It was a reckoning, a journey into the dark corners of his own soul, with Andrea as his silent guide. And somewhere, he felt, she was watching, her memory woven into the very fabric of the city, waiting for him at every turn, her unseen presence both a torment and a reminder of the love he had lost and the consequences of the path he had chosen. Echoes of the past. The morning sun cast a pale glow over Montreal as Lionel and Miranda stood in front of St. Patrick's Church. The imposing Gothic architecture loomed above them, casting long shadows across the stone steps. The church had always felt cold to Lionel, a fortress rather than a sanctuary, its walls heavy with memories he'd rather forget. He hadn't set foot inside since his wedding day, when he'd stood at the altar, full of youthful optimism, unaware of the path his life would take. Now, Andrea had drawn him back here, forcing him to retrace his past, to confront the echoes of a life he had tried to escape. Every step forward felt like a reluctant descent into his own regrets, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Andrea had planned it this way, methodically and mercilessly. Beside him, Miranda's patience was wearing thin. She tightened her coat against the crisp autumn air, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. She'd been supportive, even enthusiastic, at first. But as the journey grew longer and Andrea's challenge more demanding, she seemed less invested. Each setback had chipped away at her patience, and now her presence felt strained, her gaze distant. As they entered the church, the heavy door creaked open, its sound echoing through the vast, empty nave. The scent of incense lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of wax from the candles that flickered in the dim light. The stained glass windows cast colored patterns across the stone floor, the vibrant hues both beautiful and haunting. Lionel's eyes drifted to the altar, where he and Andrea had exchanged vows. It felt surreal to stand here again, as though he were stepping into a memory he had tried to forget. He could almost hear the priest's voice, reciting the words that had bound them together. He remembered Andrea's smile that day, a rare, genuine smile, unmarred by the coldness that had crept into her later years. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the loss, the realization that he had once loved her, or at least believed he did. Miranda's voice broke the silence, her tone clipped. "So, what exactly are we looking for?" Lionel pulled the latest clue from his pocket, unfolding the letter he'd found in the Historical Society. The place where we said our vows, where promises were made and then broken. There you will find the second key to your inheritance. He scanned the church, his gaze lingering on the altar, then the pews, trying to piece together the puzzle. Andrea was nothing if not thorough, and he knew she wouldn't make this easy. She was leading him through memories, forcing him to confront their shared history step by step. "Maybe it's hidden near the altar," he murmured, stepping forward. As he approached, he noticed a small, discreet plaque embedded in the stone floor, just before the altar steps. It was engraved with a verse. "In vows whispered beneath sacred light, lies the truth within shadowed sight." Miranda joined him, her eyes narrowing as she read the inscription. "Shadowed sight," she questioned, glancing around. "What does that mean?" Lionel felt a prickling sensation at the back of his mind. He remembered that Andrea had often spoken of shadow and light, using the words to describe the complexities of their marriage, the way they had loved and resented each other in equal measure. Shadowed sight could mean hidden, obscured, something that could only be seen when looked at from a particular angle. He examined the area around the plaque, his fingers brushing against the stone, searching for any indication of a hidden compartment or latch. But there was nothing unusual. Frustrated, he stepped back, trying to think like Andrea, to see the church the way she would have. Then he looked up, noticing the stained glass windows above the altar. The colored light cast intricate patterns on the stone floor, creating a kaleidoscope of reds, blues, and greens. Each beam of light shifted subtly as the sun moved, forming shapes that danced across the space where he stood. "What if it's in the light?" he murmured, stepping into one of the pools of colored light. The stained glass window he was under depicted Street Patrick, his figure towering, cloaked in a robe of emerald green. The light streaming through cast an almost ethereal glow, illuminating the stone floor in a soft, shifting pattern. Miranda looked skeptical, but she followed him, glancing up at the window. "What are you expecting to find?" A message carved in the stone. Lionel ignored her impatience, studying the light patterns, trying to make sense of them. He moved slightly, and the colored light shifted, revealing something he hadn't noticed before, a faint engraving on the stone, visible only in the specific angle of the green light. His heart raced as he crouched down, tracing the letters with his finger. "Seek the past that you have buried." He froze, his mind reeling. This wasn't just about finding a clue. It was a message from Andrea, as personal as it was enigmatic. She was forcing him to confront the very memories he had tried to bury, to face the truth of his decisions, his betrayals. Miranda leaned over, her expression unreadable. "What does it mean?" "Seek the past that you have buried." He stood slowly, his mind racing through fragments of their life together, trying to piece together what Andrea could be hinting at. Then it struck him, the cemetery. Andrea's family had an ancestral burial plot on the outskirts of the city, a place she had taken him to only once, years ago. He had almost forgotten about it, but the memory came rushing back now, vivid and clear. "Her family's cemetery plot," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's where we need to go next." The drive to the cemetery was silent, the weight of Andrea's words hanging over them like a dark cloud. Miranda stared out the window, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Lionel could sense her growing impatience, the way she resented Andrea's interference from beyond the grave. But he was too absorbed in his own thoughts to address it. Andrea was leading him somewhere, piece by piece, forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long since buried. They arrived at the cemetery as dusk began to settle over the landscape, casting long shadows across the graves. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decaying leaves, the silence broken only by the occasional caw of a crow perched on a nearby branch. The cemetery was old, its headstones weathered and worn, each one bearing the name of someone long forgotten. Andrea's family plot was tucked away in a quiet corner, surrounded by an iron fence that had grown rusty with age. The headstones stood in a row, each one a marker of the family's legacy, a testament to the lives that had come before. Andrea's headstone was the newest, the stone pristine and polished, her name etched in elegant script. Lionel felt a shiver run through him as he approached, the weight of his past pressing down on him with each step. He knelt before her headstone, his fingers brushing over her name, feeling the coldness of the stone seep into his skin. He noticed a small, delicate rose carved into the bottom of the headstone, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely. The rose was Andrea's favorite flower, a symbol she often wore as a brooch or tucked into her hair. Beneath the rose was a short phrase, one he hadn't noticed at the funeral. "The final truth lies within the heart." Lionel felt his breath catch, the meaning of the words eluding him, yet resonating deep within. Within the heart could mean anything, perhaps something literal, or maybe something symbolic. He felt lost, trapped in the web Andrea had woven, forced to navigate her cryptic messages with no clear destination. Miranda's voice was tight with irritation. "What now, Lionel? Are we supposed to dig? Search every grave? This is absurd." He closed his eyes, trying to shut out her frustration, trying to focus on what Andrea might have meant. "The heart," he murmured, feeling as though he were grasping at shadows. Then a memory stirred, a moment from their marriage, one of the rare times she had opened up to him about her past. Andrea had once shown him a locket, a small, heart-shaped pendant that had belonged to her mother, passed down through generations. It was her most cherished possession, and she kept it locked away, claiming it held a secret she would only reveal when the time was right. Lionel's pulse quickened. The locket. That had to be it. "We need to find her locket," he said, his voice filled with a new determination. It's the heart she always spoke of. She kept it in her jewelry box, hidden in the bottom drawer of her dressing table. Miranda's eyes widened as she realized the significance. She let out a slow breath, nodding. "Then we go back to the house." The drive back to Andrea's estate was filled with an unspoken tension. Each clue was leading them deeper into the labyrinth of Andrea's mind, and Lionel could feel himself unraveling, his confidence slipping away with each new revelation. He had underestimated her, dismissed her as a passive figure in his life, but now he saw her in a new light, a woman who had understood him more deeply than he had ever understood her. When they arrived at the house, it was dark, the only light coming from the moon that cast an eerie glow over the mansion. They entered in silence, making their way to Andrea's bedroom. where her dressing table stood like a relic from another time. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, a scent that stirred memories Lionel had tried to forget. He opened the bottom drawer, pulling out her jewelry box, a delicate piece crafted from rosewood and mother-of-pearl. His hand shook as he lifted the lid, his gaze falling on the locket, a small heart-shaped pendant engraved with the LaSalle family crest. It felt heavy in his hand, weighted with the secrets it held. With trembling fingers, he opened the locket, revealing a folded piece of paper tucked inside. Unfolding it, he read the words Andre had left for him. Her final message. In seeking freedom, you bound yourself to shadows. In betraying love, you bound yourself to loss. My final gift to you is the truth of who you are, and the knowledge that you cannot escape the past you try to bury. For the true inheritance was never wealth, but the weight of your choices. This is my legacy to you. Lionel's heart sank as he read the words. The locket held no wealth, no fortune, only the stark realization of what he had lost, and what he had become. Andrea's legacy was not the money he had hoped for, but a mirror reflecting his own failings, his betrayals, his hollow dreams. Beside him, Miranda's face twisted in anger and disappointment, her hopes shattered. They had chased a ghost, followed a path of shadows, only to find themselves empty-handed, haunted by the choices that had led them here. As he stood in the silent room, Lionel felt the weight of Andrea's final gift settle over him, a legacy of regret, one that he would carry for the rest of his life. The weight of truth. The silence in Andrea's bedroom was suffocating. Lionel stood motionless, the locket's delicate heart-shaped pendant dangling from his hand, feeling heavier than any inheritance could have been. The small piece of paper inside, bearing Andrea's final words, echoed in his mind. She had not left him wealth, but a reckoning, a mirror that forced him to confront his own choices and the hollow, deceitful life he had woven around himself. Miranda's reaction was immediate and fierce. She turned on him, eyes blazing with betrayal and fury, her voice barely above a whisper but seething with anger. This was all for nothing, wasn't it? She hissed, her fists clenched at her sides. You made me believe there was something to be gained from this game. And all we found is a reminder of your pathetic failures. Lionel met her gaze, feeling the weight of his mistakes deepen. He could see the disillusionment in her eyes, the cold realization that the life she had hoped for, one filled with wealth and freedom, had been nothing more than a mirage. I didn't know, he replied, his voice hollow, his own anger curdling into a bitter resignation. I thought it would be different. Miranda scoffed, turning away from him in disgust. Different? You dragged me into this mess, into this twisted maze of hers, promising me a future you had no right to offer. Her words cut through him like a knife, each one carrying the weight of her shattered hopes. Andrea knew you better than you knew yourself. She knew you would chase after money, after freedom, even if it meant stepping over the bodies of those who once trusted you. Her words were brutally honest, a reflection of the truth he had avoided for years. Andrea's trap had not been about the inheritance itself, but about forcing him to confront the emptiness within, to look at the path he had chosen and the people he had hurt along the way. She had crafted a labyrinth of memory and regret, each clue leading him deeper into his own soul, forcing him to acknowledge the life he had betrayed. But as he looked down at the locket, another thought stirred within him, a glimmer of defiance, a refusal to let Andrea's final message be the end. He closed his hand around the pendant, feeling the cool metal press into his palm. This doesn't have to be the end, he said, barely convincing himself. There has to be something more, something we missed. Miranda turned to him, her expression hardening. Don't you get it, Lionel? There's nothing left. Andrea gave us exactly what she wanted to give, a reminder that she controlled everything, even from beyond the grave. There's no fortune, no new life waiting for us. Only this hollow victory of hers. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper, something Andrea had buried beneath the surface. Her message had been clear, Yes, but there was a lingering hint of something else, a veiled invitation to look further, to peel back another layer of the deception that had woven itself into their lives. Andrea had always been 2 steps ahead, a woman who understood people's desires and weaknesses better than they understood themselves. If this was her final act, there had to be more to it than mere condemnation. He thought back to the years they'd spent together, sifting through memories for any detail he might have overlooked. Andrea had always had a fascination with riddles, with puzzles that led deeper and deeper into hidden truths. She had once told him that her family possessed a kind of living legacy, something more profound than wealth or status. He'd never asked her what she'd meant, dismissing it as one of her philosophical musings, but now the words came rushing back, carrying a weight he hadn't appreciated before. "What if," he said, his voice barely audible, "what if this isn't the end of her message? What if there's something she wanted us to find that goes beyond money or property?" Miranda crossed her arms, skepticism written across her face. "So now you're saying there's a hidden inheritance? More cryptic nonsense, more of her twisted games. I've had enough, Lionel." But he couldn't let it go. "Think about it," he insisted, his mind racing. Andrea always spoke of something her family valued, something intangible, something she could never fully explain. She called it a living legacy. What if this? He held up the locket, is part of it. She rolled her eyes, exasperated. "A living legacy. You're grasping at straws, Lionel. It's over. There's nothing left for us here." He shook his head. "No, Andrea wouldn't have gone to these lengths just to mock me. There's more to this. She would want me to understand something. Something important." Miranda gave him a look of pure disdain, her patience exhausted. "Believe what you want, Lionel. I'm done playing this game." Without another word, she stormed out of the room, leaving him alone in the dim light, clutching the locket that now seemed to pulse with an unspoken message. Lionel sat in silence, his mind churning over Andrea's words, her clues, the memories she had forced him to revisit. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place, forming a pattern he hadn't seen before. Andrea's legacy wasn't about wealth or status. It was about something deeper, a connection to the past that he had ignored, a history that ran through her blood and was now calling to him, pulling him toward a truth he had avoided his entire life. Determined to find the answer, he went back to the clues Andrea had left, examining each one with fresh eyes, searching for any hidden meaning. Her family's cemetery plot, the locket, the church, all were places tied to her roots, to the legacy she had spent her life honoring. It was as if she were pointing him back to the essence of who she was, asking him to see her not as his wife or his obstacle, but as a woman with a story, a lineage that reached beyond her own lifetime. His mind wandered back to the historical documents he had seen in the family archives, records of the LaSalle family that Andrea had guarded so fiercely. She had once told him about a collection of journals, writings passed down through generations, detailing the lives of her ancestors, their struggles, their triumphs, their failures. Andrea had kept them in a vault, a place she had said was for family alone. Lionel knew where it was, a small hidden chamber beneath the house, accessible only through a narrow winding staircase that led to the basement. He hadn't been down there in years, dismissing it as one of Andrea's private spaces, something that belonged solely to her. But now he felt compelled to go there, to uncover whatever she had guarded so closely. As he descended the stairs, the air grew colder, the dim light casting shadows that seemed to reach out to him. At the bottom, he found himself facing a heavy iron door, its surface etched with intricate patterns that bore the unmistakable style of Andrea's family crest. He unlocked it with the locket's key, and the door creaked open, revealing a small dark room lined with shelves filled with journals, letters, and books bound in leather, their spines worn and faded. He pulled out the nearest journal, opening it to find pages filled with elegant handwriting, words written by an ancestor whose name he could barely read. The journal spoke of resilience, of survival, of sacrifices made to protect the family's future. Each entry was a glimpse into a life that had shaped Andrea's values, her beliefs, her relentless pursuit of something greater than herself. As he read, he began to understand what she had tried to teach him. This was her true legacy, not wealth or status, but a heritage built on loyalty, on honor, on an unbreakable connection to the past. Andrea had wanted him to see beyond his own desires, to understand that his life was part of a story much larger than himself. It was a lesson he had ignored, a truth he had been too blind to see. And now, standing alone in the cold, quiet chamber, surrounded by the voices of Andrea's ancestors, he felt the weight of that legacy settle over him. He had spent years chasing a future that was hollow, driven by selfish desires and empty promises, and in the process, he had abandoned the one person who had truly understood him. He closed the journal, his hand shaking as he placed it back on the shelf. The realization hit him with a force that left him breathless. Andrea's final act had not been to punish him, but to save him, to guide him back to something real, something that connected him to the world in a way he had never understood. Lionel left the chamber, feeling a profound shift within him, a sense of clarity that he hadn't known was possible. The wealth, the inheritance, all of it seemed meaningless now, mere distractions from the deeper truth Andrea had left for him to find. He knew now that he could not run from the choices he had made, but he could change the path he would follow from here. As he ascended the stairs, he felt a strange calm wash over him, a peace he hadn't felt in years. Andrea's legacy was not a fortune or a possession. It was a reminder of the life he had squandered, and a chance, perhaps his only chance, to redeem himself, to honor the memory of a woman who had seen through his flaws and loved him enough to show him the way back. Outside, he found Miranda waiting for him, her expression hard and unforgiving. She looked at him, her eyes filled with contempt, but he could only meet her gaze with a quiet resolve. "I'm done," he said simply, his voice steady. "Andrea gave me what I needed, even if it wasn't what I wanted. I have to live with that now, and I intend to honor it." Miranda sneered, turning away from him without another word, leaving him to the silence of the autumn night. Lionel watched her go, feeling the weight of Andrea's legacy settle over him, a reminder that the life he would live from now on would be built not on lies or greed, but on truth, however painful. As he stood alone, he felt Andrea's presence, a gentle whisper carried on the wind, and he knew, finally, that he had found the answer she had left for him: redemption and resolution. The days that followed were filled with an eerie silence that wrapped around Lionel like a shroud. The mansion, once brimming with Andrea's presence and possessions, felt like a hollow shell, each room echoing with memories he had tried to escape. Yet now he welcomed them, allowing the reminders of her life to seep into his soul, to teach him what he had been too blind to see before. Miranda had left, slamming the door behind her without a word of farewell. Her departure was more of a release than a loss, a painful acknowledgement of the path he had led her down, and the dreams they had both chased without consideration of their consequences. Lionel couldn't blame her. He had promised her a life of wealth and freedom, and in the end, all he had given her was a broken legacy and a haunting lesson. The days stretched into weeks as Lionel tried to rebuild himself piece by piece, starting with the journals and letters he found in the LaSalle family vault. Every evening, he would descend the stairs to that hidden room, sitting among the writings of Andrea's ancestors, immersing himself in the stories they had left behind. Each journal was a revelation, a record of lives filled with sacrifice, courage, and a fierce loyalty to family and principles that transcended wealth or social status. It was a world he had dismissed, a lineage he had never understood. But now he saw it as a part of himself, an inheritance more valuable than any amount of money could offer. Andrea's journal, tucked in the back of the vault, was the one he dreaded reading the most. He had hesitated for days, but one night, as the autumn wind howled outside and the shadows seemed to press closer, he took it down from the shelf, his hands trembling as he turned the fragile pages. Her words were written with a careful, elegant hand, each entry filled with reflections on her life, her thoughts, her feelings, many of which he had never known. In one of the earliest entries, Andrea had written about their marriage, about the hopes she'd held when they were young and filled with promise. "I thought that love was something simple, something that could be sustained with time and effort. But I've come to realize that love, true love, requires more than just presence. It requires honesty, sacrifice, and a willingness to see each other as we truly are. I don't know if Lionel sees me, truly sees me. But I hope, one day, he will." The words hit him with a pang of regret, a sharp realization of how blind he had been to her. He had seen Andrea as an obstacle, a barrier between him and his freedom. But she had loved him, despite his flaws, despite the distance that had grown between them. She had hoped for a life with him, a true partnership built on trust. And in the end, she had seen through his deception, leaving him with a challenge not out of spite, but out of a strange, enduring love, a desire for him to finally face himself. As he continued reading, he found entries that chronicled her suspicions of his affair, her silent heartbreak, and her determination to leave a legacy that would mean something beyond material wealth. One entry, written just months before her death, revealed the depth of her understanding. "I know about Lionel and Miranda. I have known for some time. It is strange, this feeling of betrayal. It should make me hate him, make me want to cut him out of my life entirely. But instead, it has only deepened my resolve. I loved him once, and perhaps some part of me still does. But more than that, I want him to find his own path, his own redemption. He has been lost for so long, chasing shadows. Perhaps in the end, he will find his way." The words lingered in his mind, a quiet forgiveness that cut deeper than any anger or reproach could have. She had known everything, yet she had chosen to guide him, even after death, toward a truth he had been too afraid to face. She had loved him enough to want his redemption, even at the cost of her own happiness. Over the next few weeks, Lionel took small, steady steps to build a new life, one rooted in the lessons Andrea had left him. He contacted the LaSalle family's philanthropic foundation, an organization Andrea had managed with diligence and compassion. Under her leadership, it had provided resources for the community, supported local artists, and funded educational programs. He volunteered to take over her role, determined to carry on her work with the sincerity and dedication she had exemplified. The work became his lifeline, a way to give back, to honor her memory in a way that felt genuine. At first, the foundation staff met him with a mixture of surprise and caution, unsure of his intentions. They knew of his reputation, his history with Andrea, and the life he had once pursued. But over time, his consistent presence, his willingness to learn, and his genuine commitment to the work began to change their perceptions. He was no longer the distant, self-centered husband they had known by reputation, but a man transformed by loss, a man determined to atone. Each day, he uncovered more of Andrea's legacy, discovering projects she had initiated, causes she had championed, and lives she had touched. Through her foundation, he found a purpose he had never known, a connection to the city and its people that gave him a sense of belonging. Slowly, he felt himself becoming part of the legacy she had left behind, a legacy not of wealth, but of compassion, resilience, and integrity. Months passed, and the seasons changed, transforming Montreal into a winter wonderland. The first snowfall blanketed the city, bringing a quiet stillness that mirrored the peace Lionel felt settling within him. He had come to terms with his past, with the choices he had made, and with the life he had lost. Andrea's memory was no longer a haunting presence, but a guiding light, a reminder of the person he wanted to become. One evening, as he walked through the foundation's office, he noticed an old photograph on the wall. It was a picture of Andrea, taken during one of the foundation's early charity events. She stood in the center of a crowded room, surrounded by people, her face radiant with a smile he had forgotten she could wear. She looked alive, vibrant, filled with a joy he had rarely seen in her. Seeing her like that, he realized how much he had missed, how much he had failed to appreciate. He stood there for a long time, gazing at her image, a mixture of sorrow and gratitude welling up inside him. He whispered a quiet promise, one only she would hear. "I'll make it right, Andrea," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll carry on what you started. I'll honor your memory. I'll live the life you wanted me to see." In the months that followed, Lionel dedicated himself to Andrea's vision. He expanded the foundation's reach, partnering with other organizations to bring support to underprivileged communities, launching scholarships, and creating programs that provided opportunities for people who needed them the most. He found a fulfillment he had never known, a purpose that transcended his own desires. The city he had once viewed with indifference now felt like home, each street and building a testament to the legacy he was now a part of. People began to notice the change in him. Friends and colleagues who had distanced themselves over the years reached out, surprised by the transformation they saw. He reconnected with old friends, repaired broken relationships, and began to build a new circle of people who shared his commitment to giving back, to living a life that mattered. As the anniversary of Andrea's death approached, he visited her grave, standing alone in the quiet, snow-covered cemetery. He placed a single white rose on her headstone, a gesture of remembrance, a symbol of the love he had failed to show her in life. Standing there, he spoke softly, his breath visible in the cold winter air. "Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it. You saved me. And I promise, I'll keep carrying on your legacy." He closed his eyes, feeling a sense of peace wash over him, a release from the shadows that had haunted him for so long. He knew that he could never erase the past, but he could shape the future, a future built on the lessons Andrea had left him. As he walked away from the cemetery, the snow falling gently around him, he felt a warmth in his heart, a quiet resilience that had been born from pain, from loss, and from the love he had finally come to understand. Andrea's legacy would live on, not just through the foundation, but through him. He was her final gift, a testament to her vision, a man transformed by the weight of her truth, and in that transformation, he found his redemption, a life no longer bound by shadows, but illuminated by the memory of a woman who had loved him enough to lead him back to himself.